Welcome back to the Product Operations Summit. Before we get going with the next session, we would like to take a moment to thank our sponsors for helping us bring this awesome event to your screens. And don't forget, you can access even more content from past and future events on demand by becoming a PLA member. Head on over to productledalliance.com for more information. Enjoy the next session.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the next session. So we now have a panel. I am going to pass over to our lovely panelists who are all going to introduce themselves. So without further ado, over to you guys.
All right, well, I can kick it off if I'm coming through loud and clear. Let's see, loud and clear, great, thumbs are up. Okay, well, great, my name is Kasper, I'm very glad to be here. I come from a Copenhagen-based company called Pleo. It's in the fintech space, it's in expense management. We're getting to around 900 people now, so we're getting to some kind of scale. It's been around for, I think, 6-7 years now. I've been with the company for around 3 years, and I am the head of product operations at Pleo, and loving it. I'll pass it on to Antonia.
Once I can unmute myself, you'd think I'd have practice after 2.5 years. Hi, so my name is Antonia. I'm Berlin-based and have been in product operations officially for about 2 years, unofficially probably my entire tech career. I'm head of operations for the product and engineering department at ZenJob, which comprises around 100 people.
Awesome. Hi everyone, very glad to be here. My name is Prateek. I've been in product and in tech for over 11 years. My most recent role was leading product operations at Shopify for one of their products, which is called Shop, which is Shopify's big consumer-facing bet. And my job was to lead product operations across the Shop Pay and the Shop app verticals, which is all of Shop. So very excited to be here.
All right, now let's see if we can kick off with some questions. Ooh, one of my favorite ones. Maybe to introduce ourselves a little bit further, what does product ops look like in our organizations? Because I think it's always very different at very different places.
Sweet, Prateek, do you want to kick it off? Then I can go next.
Yeah, absolutely. So at Shopify, product in general is, well, let me start by saying product operations is not a centralized function at Shopify. It normally rolls up into the individual product groups that we've got. So Shopify has a bunch of different product groups. We've got, the new initiatives we're doing around fulfillment. We've got the core product. We've got merchant services, and Shop is one of the products as well. So we have VPs of product, and under the VPs of product, we've got, product directors. We've got operations. We've got analytics and biz ops, and also product ops. So product ops, while at Shopify has been around for a bit, and there's a centralized repository of a lot of very strong bits of information and best practices. The individualized tracks of how product operations needs to be done within each product line is defined by that product line. So that's I think how it works at Shopify.
All right. Well, then I can follow up on that and shed a little bit of light on how we look at things at in the Pleo context. And I think, long story short, is that we are a centralized unit. I think in contrast to what we just heard, so it's a little bit different setup. So we're a centralized unit, a lean team. I think we're a handful of people, 5-6 people, and the way we perceive our mission here at Pleo is to essentially look across all the different product and development teams we have. I believe it's around 30-35 product and development teams scattered all across the organization doing all kinds of things. And so our job is essentially to look across all those different teams and see how can we make those teams perform at the very best? How can we increase the efficiency of the team, the effectiveness of the team, so that they do things in the right way and that they do the right things, or at least that they're empowered to do the right things and to be as efficient as possible. So it's really sort of a very sort of enablement team that sits centrally and then tries to deploy these global frameworks to increase efficiency and effectiveness of the product teams. Right. So I think that should cover it for now. I'm sure we'll get way deeper on that later on. But what about you, Antonia?
Yeah, so my current role is very interesting in that I am a one-woman ops department, which means that I am very much also sitting centrally, having this bird's eye view over the entire product and engineering organization. I think it's always very interesting to debate this, right? Should product ops be embedded or should it be centralized? In my previous role, there's a much wider scope. We were also operating across Europe. We had around 50 product teams, and of course, product ops there was centralized, but certain product ops managers had focus areas. So we were split up by domains. So certain product ops managers with their agile coaching counterpart were sort of partners in crime for specific product domains.
All right, exciting. Should we jump on to the next theme? I know, do you want to stick a little bit around on this, Pratik? I see you unmuting here.
Yeah, I realized that you also wanted us to answer a little bit about what product ops does at our companies, and I realized I probably just talked about the structure. So maybe I can get into a little bit about what product ops looks like at Shopify. So as far as I understand, product ops at Shopify was really designed to help Shopify build products at scale. For a long time, Shopify, I think, operated in a bunch of tiny little different silos, and a lot of different teams were executing very well. Some teams weren't executing as well. And I think what product ops allowed Shopify to really unlock was the power of very strong execution and alignment at scale across the board. So while individual product ops functions within Shopify have individual mandates, there's an overall set of principles that everybody at Shopify from a product ops perspective definitely executes by, in terms of, I think the most important one I can point out is something called 6-week cycles, which is the planning for 6 weeks at a time. We don't necessarily do quarterly planning, we do 6-week cycle planning. And in a 6-week time period, you're able to basically bake in about 3 sprints if you're working on 2-week sprints, and you're able to kind of see what the product is going to look like at the end of 6 weeks. What do we need to do in order to get there? How do we manage escalations along the way? How do we handle dependencies along the way? And product ops is really bringing all of those different elements together to better plan and make sure that, you know, if a release date needs to move, that it's not happening at the nth moment, that it's in advance, we can plan for it, that everybody's aware of what's going on, and really so that there's no surprises. I think that's the best way I can characterize it.
All right, very interesting. Now, it sounds like product ops was actually quite a huge function at Shopify, right? Were you actually hired for product ops?
So like I said, product ops at Shopify, I think, has been around a few years. I was hired into one of Shopify's product groups called Shop, which had never hired anybody for product ops before. And so my job was to set up the mandates, set up the definition of what product ops within this group has to do. What are we responsible for? More importantly, what are we not responsible for? And, you know, chances are we're hiring a bunch of product managers who've never worked with product ops before. So how do you educate product managers to better work with product ops? How do we really educate them about how they can unlock their additional value with product ops and not just have product ops be a person in the meeting that isn't adding any value? And how can we really help kind of, you know, make those changes for individualized product teams? Because even within a product group, there's multiple product directors, there's multiple product leads, they all have PMs under them. They all probably want to operate in their own way. Some people like 6-week cycles, some people like planning in advance, some people like to just run a bunch of experiments and see what sticks. You have to kind of get into the weeds of what individual PMs want to accomplish and the path that they want to do it in, and really set them up for success in those ways.
All right, this is really interesting that you mentioned, sort of defining this mandate, etc. Because I think I was quite lucky in that both my product ops roles, I was either sort of the first official product ops hire, but the notion was already there, right? Or I actually got hired into a role where people had at least heard of ops beforehand. Yeah. Casper, I think am I wrong in thinking that you basically started product ops at Pleo?
Yeah, that's right. And super exciting journey so far. And I think just I can shed a little bit of light on why that happened essentially. So as I think with many companies that go through a lot of scale, and certainly that's been the case for Pleo, we've grown incredibly fast. There are certain sort of at least what we consider sort of a debt that accumulates over time that you might deal with later on, right? And some of that debt can be categorized into from technical debt or organizational debt, and all these different kinds of debt that sort of accumulates because you need to focus on other stuff, right? And that's been the case for us as well. We've been really blasting away and building a lot of cool stuff and selling and all these different things. But as you grow simultaneously, there's sort of certain aspects of your organization that might not really follow with that scale. And so we start to see cracks happening here and there. When we became 100 and 200 and 300 and 400 people in our product and development organization, that just didn't really, so like our thinking just didn't make sense in the new reality that we were in. And so my boss, the CPO at Pleo, and I, we sort of looked at each other deep in the eyes one night, and we're like, who's going to take care of all this debt? Like who's going to do it? Because in the past, we had tried to distribute the responsibility on the senior leaders of the product organization. But some of these challenges you couldn't sort of solve them with, sort of this 2 hours here and 2 hours there and 3 hours here. Like it just didn't work. We tried, but it just didn't work. So we ultimately ended up investing in this and to sort of help deal with some of that debt that had already accumulated. And then, of course, invest in the future of the scalability of the organization. So to your question, yes, that's when sort of we decided to do that, and that I was going to lead the charge for that. I think that's around a year and a half ago.
All right. And have you hired since then?
Yeah, we've been extremely fortunate in that regard, both for some slightly random, like happenstance, super amazing experiences where just like an event like this where someone reached out and it was an amazing hire, but we've also done more traditional hire like inbound and outbound, and then we also moved people around internally to join the team and really grow this area. So we've done a little bit of everything to put people on this team.
Now, is there anything you look for in particular? And Pratik, this goes out to you as well.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
Is there anything you look for in particular when hiring for product ops?
Yeah, I guess that's kind of the one of the themes here, right? Pratik, do you want to take a stab at it? Then I'll chip in.
Yeah, sure. So I will preface this by saying what you look for in a product ops candidate will vary depending on how mature your product ops function is. So if you're setting up a function from the ground up, you're going to need a different set of skills. If you've set up a product ops function, you need somebody to come and execute against a very tried and tested strategy, you need a whole other skill set. So what I personally looked for, because we were just setting up, was, one of my big goals was, how do we get this person to work with PMs and educate them about how a product ops person can add value? And for that, they needed to have a tremendous amount of empathy for what a PM needs to succeed. So in my particular case, I was slightly biased towards people that had prior PM experience or that very, very closely had worked with PMs before. And in a lot of cases, that seems to have worked out for me. The other thing I think that I always like to focus on is a bias for very strong execution and planning. So, during the interview process, I would test for things like you're running a project and you're 6 weeks out and you don't know if you're going to hit all of your timelines. What kind of a tracking sheet would you design to make sure everybody's on track? Or how often would you check in a check-in meeting? Or if somebody isn't showing up to meetings, what other modes of communication would you use to make sure that they're on track and they're organized and things like that? So a very strong bias for execution and planning, in addition to having that empathy for PM. I think those are two very key things that I look for.
Now that's really interesting because I think, I mean, while I love, being organized, I'm not sure I am such a spreadsheet superstar, for example, but I think that actually might be, you might need different skill set depending also on the size of the organization, right? I mean, right now I'm servicing around 100 people. And to me, actually, what's almost more important is staying lean. And obviously, because I do work in a startup, I make sure that ops should and can be lean. I mean, first of all, like, don't introduce processes to things that work already, right? But the other thing is, and I think it goes back to this sort of preferring people with a product background, maybe because they have something that we like to call a product mindset, right? So really, what is the problem? What is a possible solution? How can we test this solution in the leanest possible way and then implement and iterate on it? So I think that's very interesting that you brought that up. Maybe it really depends on the kind and the size of organization.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think I can also second a lot what both to be honest what both of you said, because I think it's all of it can be important depending on what you're. I think it's like one of the questions I think was I was also thinking about preparing for this event here is why do you need product operations and why do you even, and I think your answer to that in your given organization will also determine a little bit what you need to look for the first hire, for the second hire, for many other hires, just like in any other part of the organization, right? And I think in our case, because we're sort of a centralized unit, I was looking quite a lot at also, like, do you have some kind of process, project management, change management experience? Because what we're looking at in our team is applying sort of global or semi-global frameworks and like rolling out changes and looking where we are today, the status quo, figuring out where we want to be in the future, and then build that bridge essentially and get people across it. So it's a lot about change management. It's a lot about people skills, actually. It's really about understanding how do people work today, what doesn't work, and then figure out where you want to go and get people in that direction, right? So it's a lot about change management also, at least in our way of doing product operations. But that's what that's a little bit from what we're looking at least.
Yeah, very interesting. I think this change management aspect is not to be underestimated because fundamentally, and I think there is, right, this little bit of contested area, right? Like we've seen other big product names address this, right? Whose job is this actually, right? And it used to be understood that this is product leadership stuff, right? But right, like you said earlier, Casper, these aren't just things that will get solved with 2 hours there or 3 hours here. And I actually found, and this is actually how I got into operations, I used to pick up these tasks because I was just very engaged and I felt the pain and I wanted to solve the pain, selfishly for myself. And then if it helps the organization, that's great. But I think this change management aspect is definitely, and also the interpersonal relationship, because ultimately you will come across something that maybe a certain PM felt very strongly that they owned, right? And how do you maintain that relationship and how do you make that a positive thing rather than, being this kind of function where, okay, we're introducing product ops now and suddenly we're telling everybody what to do.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good point, actually. And also maybe just to add a little bit from our side, because I also see some questions in the chat here around like, what are you looking for? And I think to my previous point, the product and development teams at Pleo, they don't consist of product managers. They might have product managers on there, but they might not, right? But for the most part, it's engineers, right? And you have product designers, you have product marketeers and analysts and all these different crafts in there. And so what we're actually trying to do, setting up product operations at Pleo, is actually to have these different crafts represented. So in the first sort of real team we had at product ops team at Pleo, we had product management, we had product marketing, we had engineering, we had was some project management. So like we had different competencies in the team because we were trying to build for teams that had that same composition, right? But again, it ties a little bit back to like what is the composition of your, or what is the structure you're in, what are you trying to achieve, and so on. So, but that was kind of our approach.
Pratik, any words from your side?
Yeah. The way I would say it is, I think product operations exist because in an organization where product ops doesn't exist, a PM would end up doing a lot of that work. And if you think about it, a PM's job, it's different in every organization, obviously, but more or less a PM's job is to figure out the what and the why of when you're building something. And I think product ops, at least the way we saw it at Shopify, was focused a little bit more on the how. And if product ops doesn't exist, a product management person has to get very deep into the how, which takes time away from the what and the why, which is, it may not have consequences right off the bat, but in an extended time frame, I think it does, because you need your PMs to be thinking about what's next and what's going on, and you need them to have some time back to be able to plan. And ordinarily, the how in terms of planning and execution and rituals and processes, they would just do off the side of their desk because nobody else is doing it. So I think product ops has to exist because you get dedicated focus on the how, and it gives PMs time back to focus on the what and the why. And I think that's what's really valuable.
Excellent. Let's maybe talk a little bit about the hiring and interview process. And I would love to hear from you. I've actually never hired another product ops person, but I was deeply involved in finding my successor, for example, but also defining product ops roles and actually also going through the hiring process myself. So it's very interesting. You kind of see this little transition where a couple of years ago, because product ops was still fairly new, the hiring process was essentially speak to as many people as possible. And if you sort of feel like there is a fit there, right, you're hired. But now I'm seeing actually more and more, take-home assignments or slightly more formalized processes. Maybe you guys can talk a little about that.
Yeah, for sure. And I also see a lot of questions in the chat that we need to figure out how we can pick up somehow, I think, because it's super interesting in there. But maybe I can share that. I think it's going to be a quick sort of summary of how we do it. So at Pleo, we have a best practice across the entire organization, and that's just, sort of do that because it works. And then you can sort of tweak it a little bit depending on your team and your domain and so on and so forth. But the simple structure that I followed is there's sort of a recruiter, assuming there sort of is a public role. There's a sort of a recruiter screen. There's sort of an internal evaluation of that initial sort of set of candidates that have passed through that recruiter screen. There's a recruiter call with our talent folks here at Pleo. Immediately thereafter, assuming the person or the candidate passes that, there's a challenge or a case with 2, 3, maybe 4 questions that are tailored specifically to the team you'd be joining. Be a product specific case that the candidate then hopefully solves very well and submits, and that is then reviewed by, in this case, me. And if I like it, you get the thumbs up. If you don't, you get the thumbs down. And if you pass that, you then go into sort of an interview process with me, and then that's followed by a team interview. And we do have quite a lot of stages here, but that's because we really want to make sure we hire great people. Then you have an interview with a team. So that would usually be, in this part of the business, a product manager, an engineer, maybe a designer, an analyst, or a user researcher, something like that, a product marketer maybe. And that's actually then followed by a values interview, which will usually be with our CPO, to see like, do you belong here at Pleo? Like that kind of final check. So it's quite a long process, but it really ensures that we hire great people.
And what are you looking for in that take-home assignment? I'm very interested.
Okay, yeah, well, we can double click on that real quick. Actually, it's as to me at least, and this is a personal thing, right? It could be the same case, someone else reviewing it, different evaluation. But for me, there's a lot in just the presentation of your findings or your submission, your answers, whatever it is. Can you express yourself in a concise way? Like maybe a little bit of like just so it's easy to consume, because that is also what you'll be doing on the inside. And obviously, like, do you know what you're talking about? Like, is it crisp? Is it well argued? Like, are you using the right, maybe this sounds a little like basic or a little weird, but like, are you using the right words to describe the things that you'll be working on the inside? And because those little tiny things can really just, okay, this person actually doesn't know what he or she is talking about, or so there's just these little nuances in there. Then like, did you like, is your response to the challenge at a high enough level? Like, it's kind of yeah. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I think communication skills are definitely up there for product ops managers. Pratik, what about you?
Sure. So Shopify, for better or for worse, already has a pretty well-defined product ops recruitment process. And just like for product management or for engineering, there's a number of people in the organization that are certified to interview for product ops. And for better or for worse, the process goes like this. There's a recruiter screen. There is an hour, usually with the hiring manager. And if both of those go really well, you would go into a case interview where you don't have to take anything home, but there's a case presented to you on the spot and you have an hour to solve it.
Okay.
And I don't want to give too much away about the case because it's a case that we've been using for a long time. But I will tell you that it's focused on how do we take a product team that's off track and get them back on track, and how would you go about doing that? If they do a very good job with how that goes, there's usually a stakeholder interview round, and generally the stakeholder that you get to interview with is going to be the product lead or the product director that you are aligned to as a product ops manager. And they get a sense from you on, what would you change? What kind of processes do you like? What do you like to shy away from? How do you plan for things? And generally with these 4 steps, we get a pretty good idea if we like somebody.
Very interesting. There's actually a question in the chat that I would love to touch upon. What are your feelings on interviewing or hiring individuals without product experience? Are there any other roles that give you confidence when product is not on the resume? And we touched upon this briefly earlier, but I know there, especially now with product ops becoming more and more visible, more and more people are thinking about, well, actually, this could be the role for me. So I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I can go first. I'm biased towards people with product experience, but if you don't have product experience, it's certainly not a deal breaker, not in my book at least. And generally, I look for the evidence of being very good at executing and very good at being organized and planned. Because for most cases, in the absence of product experience, if you've got the ability to function in a chaotic environment and bring a little bit of order into that chaos, but also have what I like to call a growth mindset. You've probably heard the word growth mindset so many different times. I have a very specific interpretation of that. If there's people in the audience that have interviewed with me before, I interviewed a lot when I was at Shopify. If there's people in the audience that have interviewed with me before, a question I always ask is to test growth mindset is, give me an example of something you didn't know how to do 18 months ago, but you're very good at doing now. And it can be anything. You can come and tell me, I didn't know how to play the guitar and I know how to play the guitar now. That's totally okay. But if you want to always learn, if you want to always get better at things that you don't know how to do, if you're good at functioning in chaos and in flux, and if you've got strong execution, I think a lack of product experience is something that I can overlook.
Yeah, I think I can second that. I do think, again, it depends on what you're hiring for, right? You could be hiring a product manager where it's extremely important that that person has a lot of product development and product management exposure in the past or experience. Whereas for another role with the same title, it might be a completely different set of characteristics, right? So at least that's my perspective. And I think it's not, as I said in the beginning, right? We hired for engineering, and we had product marketing competencies on the team, and so it's not critical at all. I think I've also put a lot of emphasis on change management, on project management skills, But I do think it does give a little bit of an edge in some circumstances, especially if you're in an organization where I think I'm not sure I really like the sort of this phrase of being a product led, but like where there's a big emphasis on, because usually you're customer led regardless, right? Because those are the people you're going to be serving, right? But like if there's a big emphasis on building a good product in your organization, then maybe it's beneficial like to have some kind of product experience in the past.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And honestly, my answer here would be the same answer I give to people that get in touch with me asking me, how do I get into product? I don't have a technical background. Or I want to land my first gig. How do I get into product? And honestly, the answer to me and what's been most successful for me is prove you can do the job before you have the title, right? You don't have to be even in tech. If you can show me that you understood, a barrier to efficiency and you improved that over time, that is a great story to tell, right? And you don't need to be in product, you don't need to be in tech at all. As long as you can show me that you discovered an inefficiency, you thought about what to do about it, you communicated this, and it worked out. That's a great story. And I think it's the same, like for product ops or any new role, actually.
Yeah, and I think certain organizations have certain. Maybe you've had that particular in either where you are now or in the past, like where they have certain internal programs where you can actually sort of rotate into some kind of part-time situation where you maybe PM a little bit or associate PM a little bit or something like that, and while you're doing some other stuff as well, and that might be able to get you into product. Although I think like what is product, I think it depends a lot on the organization. But to be honest, if you're looking to get into product management, then I wouldn't start, in my opinion, with product operations. I would probably go the other way around if that's how it is. But just for that part, I wouldn't start in product ops if you're going into go into product management.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I've certainly met a lot of candidates who want to use product ops as a way to get into product management because they get to work so closely with product management. It doesn't always work. It has worked with some people I know, but it doesn't always work. A very interesting point you raised about how do you typically get into a career in product? Well, product ops, I think I already kind of talked about the skills I would look at if you don't have a product mindset. Product management is a little bit different. And I agree with all of the points that you've made, Casper and Antonia. And I think the only one I would add to that is go be an entrepreneur, even if you want to start something really, really small as an experiment. Because building something 0 to 1, even if it's not something tech focused, even if you want to bake a bunch of cookies and go to your local bake sale and sell a business and learn how to market it and learn how to price it and learn how to do it still teaches you how to build something from 0 to 1. And you get a tremendous amount of appreciation for what it means to build a product that people will use. Shopify, as an example, a pretty significant portion of PMs that we hire have some kind of an entrepreneurial background. So it's definitely, there's a lot of transferable skills in at some level start, even if the business fails, the learnings you get from that are invaluable to eventually get into a career in product. So I would add entrepreneurship to that mix for sure.
See, that's really interesting because I think that entrepreneurial spirit is exactly what you need for your first product ops hire. Because that person is going to have a tough time. Like, it cannot be understated. Like, you're coming into an organization with existing, hierarchical structures, existing social structures, and now you're coming in and you're saying, okay, this thing that you've always been doing so far, well, now I'm doing it and I'm improving it, right? And that can be so tricky.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, the same here. I think, one thing is in my case, having been in the organization for a while and observed how it's scaled and so on, and then taken on the job. Another thing is, I think, being hired to do it in an existing organization where everything is new for you. That I think I can imagine, but it must be a difficult challenge for sure.
Maybe another question from the chat, which I find quite interesting. What roles do you have under product ops in your organization? Because I think that's always quite interesting, right? So when do you go, maybe as a follow-up from this, when do you go from hiring generalists to hiring specialists?
Yeah, I can take a stab at it. Tricky, I think, tricky question. Well, I mean, it's not tricky to answer what we have because it's pretty straightforward. Currently, we have product operations managers specifically, and senior product operations managers. We don't do associates in this part of the business. They do in other parts of the business. And product marketeers or product marketing is represented in there. We had an engineering lead in there for a period of time. And we also actually had a product designer at some point in there to represent that part of the business as well.
Oh, interesting.
So, but we could have a data analyst in there for sure, and we might get that eventually, but we don't have that currently. Yeah.
I can go next. At Shopify, we've got product ops managers and senior product ops managers. You also then have leads and senior leads, and eventually you get to director. We generally like to hire, at least on the product ops side, we like to hire generalists because the function is still in its very early days. And somebody that has the ability to go learn something that they've never done before and generally be a jack of all trades, I think is very valuable. If this was it, what I always say about product ops is it's what product management used to be 15 years ago. It's just starting to get sexy. And I think a generalist kind of approach, at least for me, has always been preferable.
Yeah, I find this quite interesting because thinking about it, like in a far distant future, I would love to actually have a team of specialists. So, have an actual operations department with people in product ops, design ops, research ops, data ops. I think in my particular fantasy, that would sort of be amazing. But obviously, I am a generalist, right? I started as a generalist, and I believe I'm going to stay a generalist because that gives you the most holistic overview of actually what needs to be done. Because product ops is still quite a blurry discipline, I would say.
Yeah, so certainly second the last point. I've spent some time with this, talking to a handful of companies around the world to understand how they define product operations, and it's always something different. So I think that's just how it is for now. To your point, Pratik, right? It's still sort of evolving and solidifying and figure out what is this thing. But I think it's natural, right? Because it depends so much on what the organization is trying to achieve when you start it and evolve it, right? There's a lot of activity going on in the chat around this thing, around TPM.
I was just going to say,
I
think we've got about 20 minutes more. We should probably start getting to the questions in the chat. I definitely want to get to as many as I can. So,
all right. Let's take the TPM one. So, what is the difference, right, between product ops and technical program or project management?
Pratik, do you want to take a stab? Do you guys have
I can take a stab. At Shopify, a lot of times they're interchangeable. There's a lot of subgroups within Shopify where TPMs and product ops managers report into the same director of ops. And sometimes, depending on the portfolio, depending on how technical it is versus product driven versus marketing driven versus go to market, you may need one versus the other. It's definitely interchangeable, and the line is quite blurry, I would say. It's not necessarily two different things.
Yeah, I think I would second that. I think, to me, program and project management can be part of product ops, but it's a means to an end, right? Ultimately, if you're in product ops, your goal is to make the product organization effective and efficient. And part of that, you will be taking sort of skill and methodologies from program and project management, but that's not your core mission.
Right.
That's how I would define it.
Yeah, I think from my experience, we actually don't have technical program management yet at Pleo. And we're getting to 900 people right now. So we're actually exploring it now. And I think we have one coming in soon to start that part of the organization soon. But we had the conversation recently on like, what is that a product thing? What is that? And I think our conclusion was that the TPMs are going to sit closer to the engineering part of the organization, report into the CTO and that sort of structure, whereas this is it's a little bit closer to the CPO and that sort of part of the organization. And I think that's also represented in the chat here by some of the comments. Like that is actually how we think about it. And the TPMs will be driving more engineering heavy programs, whereas the products will be driving more it's so interconnected, right? But a little bit more product programs, if you will.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Should we go from the beginning? I want to go in order because there's some people that have been waiting for a long time for their questions.
Sure, feel free to. I've tried to draw in some questions as we went along.
Yeah, really good job, by the way, on moderating sort of ad hoc.
I appreciate it, Antonia.
It's very ad hoc.
No, I appreciate it. It's like a good product ops person, just getting your hands dirty, jumping in without any background. I love it. I see a question here, which is, what role does product ops play in portfolio management and strategic planning? I can very quickly go first. Like I said, at Shopify, we've got 6-week cycles. And you generally need to have a process to plan for what the next 6 weeks is going to look like, and then the following 6 weeks after that. And then there's also, in general, an annual planning process that says, okay, what are the things we want to broadly invest in 2023, in 2024? And product ops across many of the product teams within Shopify runs a lot of that planning process in terms of how long should the planning process be, how should we go about ideating, how should we do prioritization. So it is definitely a very involved role from that perspective at Shopify.
Yeah, I love this question actually, because there, in the past at least, for me, there was some ambiguity where some product managers didn't know, where that line is and where product ops ends and product management starts. And I think actually that's why some PMs can get a little bit hesitant to work with ops roles. But the way I try to explain it is always I facilitate the work, right? So like that could be with senior leadership, could be with PMs. I give people the framework to have discussions. I'm not having the discussion, right? I am facilitating an OKR review or a planning session, a strategy session for the next year. I'm not making those decisions. Those decisions are completely up to the people doing the actual work.
Yeah, I think from our side, I think these words, portfolio management, strategic planning, they're probably also in the original vision that I laid out for products, but it was extremely broad, right? Because it was so difficult to define. And in practice, we actually don't really touch that yet, and might not. So the strategic planning of our entire organization actually is distributed on the leaders in the teams and in the domains, and it's sort of taken care of, if you will, by the operating model that we have at Pleo. Whereas portfolio management isn't really a concept we work with yet. It might come, and I know there's some pretty cool software out there that some other speakers are from this event are also building, right? So I think maybe that is on the rise, but we're not really using that lingo at Pleo yet. So we don't really play a role in that.
Okay. Should we move on to the next one?
Yeah.
Sure.
How long have each of you had product ops at your organizations? I think we sort of touched on that, but there's a second part of the question, which is, how have you measured the success of product ops?
That's a difficult
Casper,
one.
do you want to go first?
I don't know.
Please go first, Casper.
I don't know if I want to. No, I think, yeah. So that is a very difficult question. It's not a difficult question, but it's difficult to answer for I think in a good way for the people listening here, so they can actually use something. So I've tried to for the last 3 years of my sort of time at Pleo, I've been working on sort of internal efficiency, effectiveness, and it is quite difficult to make meaningful metrics for that. And we're really struggling with the same thing for our team, is figuring out meaningful ways to measure the success of our and the impact that we have. And so we don't have this sort of quarterly, or we try to, but we don't. It's really difficult to have these sort of long-lasting, overarching efficiency metrics. So the way we try to do it is to actually break it further down into the specific projects at hand. So recently we rolled out a sort of entirely new way for all the teams to work with roadmaps. And so we had specific metrics for that project. And right now we're working on a sort of a big customer feedback project to make that a better process. And then we have metrics for that project, but we really struggle with sort of the big efficiency metrics for the team. So unfortunately, that is my answer.
Okay.
Honestly, my answer is exactly the same. Like, I've always measured projects or programs or whatever you may call them, initiatives, because, and you know what, by this point, I'm actually starting to challenge whether we do need to measure product ops as an overarching function. As long as we can ensure we can prove that the things we do are successful and are improving, right? Because by definition, every measure you come up with that is so overarching, be it lead time, things delivered, etc., that is artificial. And I would love to hear somebody finally solve this question for all of us in product ops, right?
Let's see, maybe Pratik can take us.
Please do, yeah.
I can tell you what I did, and you guys can decide whether it's something that could work for you. I can just tell you what I did. Like I said, one of the parts of our Shopify recruitment process for product ops is your last round is with a stakeholder, which is a product director that you're typically going to be aligned to. So what I would do once the person is hired is that product ops person would sit in a room with that product director and map out the next 6 months of here's everything that we've got to do from a product management perspective, from a roadmap perspective, and product ops would come up with a plan to ensure from an execution perspective that we get there. So how do I measure the effectiveness of product ops? I go see whether the product director hit all of their goals and did a release date move. Did something that was supposed to happen not happen, and why didn't we catch it sooner? So if you're able to create successful outcomes for the product management leader that you're assigned to, then you've done your job as a product ops manager. And that's how I would measure it.
Yeah, I think we played. I think that makes a lot of sense. And originally we played around with this thought around actually asking, so we ran a huge survey internally and did a bunch of sort of diagnostics in the beginning that we could try to sort of benchmark against. And one component of that exercise, we actually didn't do it, but I think it's a pretty good idea, to be honest, and I want to do it, is to actually ask, say, all the PMs, all the product designers, all the engineers, say, break down your day for me, like percentage-wise. Okay, I spent 50% of my time on this, 20% of my time on this, and 30% of my time on that. Okay, is that how you would like it to be? And then maybe you can actually try to solve some or work on changing the balance so that next time when you run the survey, it's actually not 50%, but it's 80% time spent on the how or whatever, right? And I think that could be a way of approaching it also. It's just a basic survey to your stakeholders and the people you're supposed to be working for, if you will, or enabling, and then do it again 6 months later.
Yeah, I think that is the most satisfying approach, at least for now.
Yeah, maybe.
Awesome. So we've got a couple of questions that we've sort of already gotten to, so I'm just going to skip ahead. Apart from the head of product or director or lead, who do you think you need first once your strategy is drafted?
Generalists.
Yeah, I think we sort of agreed on that.
Yeah, sure. I'll jump on that boat. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. We've got Antonia. I think you've got a couple of these in the middle about TPMs and about hiring people without specific experience. What is one piece of advice you would give to a candidate to stand out in the interview process? Antonia, why don't you go first?
I'm going to be very annoying here and say it depends. Like, what is that company trying to solve? What is that product organization weak in? And then prove that you're the solution to that, right? Like, that's why product ops roles are so different. I mean, if you read 10 job descriptions for product ops, it's 10 different jobs, hands down, because some companies might be very weak in gathering data. Some companies might be very weak in funneling back customer feedback to the PMs. Some companies have a low maturity or are not good at being product led. So they need someone who is really sort of a methodologies nerd, right? It really depends what role you're there to fulfill. And I would really go beyond just looking at product ops.
Yeah, I think one little take from me on this is I'm big on energy. I'm really big on energy, and I think it's so important, and especially in a role like this where you like, and maybe this because we're sort of a central unit that tries to look across all the teams. Like it can be a little bit, change management and project management is maybe not so fun, all the time, right? And you got to change ways of working, and things are fine. Like, why are we changing? And so you really sort of bring that energy to the process of doing these changes. I think that's, to me, a really big thing. I think so. If I can feel that the person is energized, then that's a big win in the process for me.
Okay, that's awesome. I can very quickly go. I don't want to give you guys the boring pieces of advice about get examples around execution, get examples around growth mindset. Instead, I'm going to say, ask really smart questions of your interviewer. An example of smart question is some of the questions we've got here today. How do you measure the success of this product ops team that I'm interviewing for? In 6 months, what is going to happen? Like, what am I going to have to do for you to look at me and say, you're doing an amazing job? What are the things you'd like me to get done? So asking really strong questions that show that you're motivated, I think, is a great way to stand out in the interview process.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's also a great way to actually figure out what the job is that you're being hired for, because it's not always straightforward.
Nope.
And you also put a lot of stress on the hiring manager, right? Because that means that person will have to know, right? And usually that might not be the case, right? So I think that can be an interesting conversation also for the candidate to will there be a meaningful job for me here, or am I actually going to be defining it myself?
Yeah. Okay. What roles do you currently have under product ops in your organizations?
We covered that, right?
I think we covered that. I'm trying to think of what is the difference between a head of product ops and a chief of staff to the chief product officer?
I love this question. I actually just had a conversation about this the other day. And you know what? Actually, not too much. Like there is a lot of overlap. And I think actually something that we overlook quite a lot in product ops is how it helps senior leadership, how it helps them to actually read on the things that are important. Because if you don't have that first, product vision, that strategy, then everything else that cascades down from that, everything you do is relatively, it doesn't matter, like, to put it very bluntly, right? So I love working with senior leadership and enabling them and giving them the tools to become more effective and not have to go down in the weeds constantly or be 100% just a hiring machine, right? I think this is a really, really important part that product ops can play in leveling up the entire organization.
I think that's a good point, and very, very relevant, actually. So when I was starting product operations, we were trying to figure out what was my title going to be? Like, what is this thing we're going to do? Like, what is it? And we're actually discussing if it was going to be chief of staff or head of product operations. So we were kind of thinking, that's kind of the same thing. We don't have a chief of staff either, so I don't know if that would be sort of completely overlapping. But I do know that one of our areas of responsibility in product operations is actually sort of a big chunk of the product management experience at Pleo. So we're facilitating various sessions with the product leadership. We have a big stake in sort of various components to the product management experience, like the hiring process, like the onboarding experience, like upskilling, all these different things. So in that regard, assuming that's what the chief of staff does in your companies out there is an overlap for sure.
I think I agree with both of you, with one very small difference. I think in many cases that I've seen, a chief of staff to the chief product officer is still advising the product officer on strategic bets to take in the future. There is a little bit of actual defining what goes into the roadmap and the big bets that we should make. And like Antonia said, I think the head of product ops is a little bit more focused on facilitating the how it should happen once a decision on a roadmap has been made. So I think that's the one key difference I would point out. But I think apart from that, you're right. It's mostly the same. Okay. We've got, just scrolling through to see what else we've got.
The next one is, since product ops is a new domain, what kind of resources do you use to upskill your teams?
Oof, spicy. Okay, very, very interesting. That is actually very interesting, and I wish I had a really good answer for that. I actually don't. So I think there's no shortage of problems to solve for us in product operations at Pleo. And while it might seem sort of like a cheap answer, that is kind of the learning curve right now. It's actually doing the work. And we could of course invest in all these courses and books and all these different things, but I think that's for later, to be honest. Right now it's crunch time. We need to get a lot of stuff done, and we'll have to deal with the career development and like as we do with all other competencies and people at Pleo. So there's a separate track for that, but not sort of anything over the top on top of that. No, unfortunately not. What about you guys?
I can go next. I think you have to break down best practices and resources into two categories. You have internal documentation and external documentation. Internal documentation should mostly be about building context. So things like, we decided to build this certain thing. Why did we do it? What did we do along the way that didn't work? Did we try to do this before and it did work, and why didn't it work? So talking to as many people to understand the journey of how we got here, I think is a really good way to get a lot of very useful context. From an external perspective, understand how product ops works at different organizations and things that you can use in your organization. This is a meaningless plug, but go listen to Garisha's podcast. It's amazing. She gets to talk to different people every single time who do product ops across a variety of different sizes of companies and industries. So that's been a great resource for me. So those are the two things that come to mind for me.
Yeah, I second that.
I think I can't overstate, and I swear I'm not being paid for this, but I can't overstate the just willingness to help of the PLA Slack community. It was really the first and only product ops community that I found 2 years ago when I was starting, and just the amount of people that product ops channel is active, and people share methodologies, they share what they've gone through, they ask questions, and we really help each other, right? And it's so wonderful to see. And I think one of the challenges being in product ops is that, yeah, it is still fairly new. We've only really just started to scratch the surface, but it's also wonderful because we can figure it out together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. And personally, I also got a lot of value from just contacting people directly on LinkedIn who's in the current position that seem, and in a cool company, like, what? How do you do this? And like, I don't know. And then we had a conversation about that, right? So I think that's also quite valuable, actually. Just reach out to people. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm sure Pratik is available, Antonia is available. Just
absolutely
reach out. We'll have a conversation as well.
Absolutely. All right.
Cool. Do you guys know? Yeah, what happens at 8? What happens in 2 minutes? Does it shut down?
Everything disintegrates and
the platform explodes. That's it.
Okay. Well, should we just conclude then and say?
I'm gonna give. Do we have time for one more question? I don't.
Oh, we have Ruth. Ruth is crashing the party.
Hi everyone. I was just going to say thank you so much. That was a really great session. Really took the curveballs there with a few unexpected difficulties. I just want to say an extra special thank you for dealing with all of those, and was a really great session. Really a real shame that Garisha couldn't join us. Please do check out her podcast. It is amazing. And hopefully she'll be back with us at the next one, so we can have a second go at that. But yeah, thank you everybody. Please enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully see a lot of you at our next session. And thanks again to our speakers. You did really well. Awesome. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.